Good evening. I'm George Latimer, Westchester County Executive. It is Wednesday, September 30th, and welcome to the latest in our series of town hall discussions. For the next hour, we're going to be together here on Facebook, and we're going to have a chance to talk about the issue of housing, which has many different elements to it. If you were with us earlier in the month of September when we began this series, we had a session on seniors issues, and then we also had an session on economic development 2 weeks ago. And so we're going in alternate Wednesdays from 6 to 7 and having discussion on some of these issues. We welcome your feedback, and you can communicate with us directly in one of two ways. You can either send an email to communications@westchestergov.com. That is our email address by which any questions will be received, or you can comment on the Facebook page with a question. Now, we have a limited amount of time in any hour period. I may not be able to get to all the questions, but if you frame the questions to us in email, we'll get back to you and respond if we don't respond on camera. Obviously, we're going to try to consolidate some questions when we have different questions that are in the same basic area of public policy. Tonight's purposes are housing. There are other topics to discuss. We're not going to be getting into those issues tonight unless they're tangential to housing, but that doesn't mean we won't come back and in future days talk about some of those other issues that we think will be helpful. We'll try to keep this series going as a way to communicate. We're going through the COVID crisis now into the next month, 7th month, 8th month, however many months it's been. So it's reduced the amount of in-person sessions that we can have. So we had for many months coffee and conversation. On Saturday mornings, I would meet with a local county legislator. We'd meet at a firehouse or a community center and have an open dialogue in which people were present. But since it's still not as easy or as wise to have people in the room with you up to a point, we're using this mechanism in the meantime, and we look forward to the day when the pandemic is lifted and we can go back to sort of the normal means of communications and do this in person as well as doing it online. Our topic tonight of housing is one that is important to everybody because we as human beings need shelter. We need to be able to live in some context, and of course we live here in Westchester County in a geographical area of a certain amount of size and space with different communities and a wide variety of available housing. And in most cases, the issue of housing in Westchester County is a combination of how much is available and how much is affordable. And in Westchester County, you have a county that, because of its proximity to New York City, the real estate values are very high. And it's very difficult, much, much more difficult than it would be in other parts of the state or the nation, to find homes that you could buy, apartments that you could rent, or places that you could live in whatever kind of capacity that's affordable for those who aren't at the upper end of the economic structure. I think of the places that I've lived in my life. When I was growing up with my parents, the first 5 years of my life I spent in an apartment building in the south side of Mount Vernon. Then my parents struggled to put together enough money to buy the world's smallest house, although it was big to me as a child, on South 14th Avenue in Mount Vernon, and I stayed there until I left in the 70s. And that house cost, I think, $11,000 to buy, which in 1959, when my parents bought it, was a tidy sum of money. I don't think my dad was making $10,000 a year at that point, and I know my mom was working, but she was making just a few $1,000s a year. The pay scale was completely different. Once I was emancipated, I remember renting apartments in different parts of Mount Vernon, paying $200 a month for a third-floor walk-up. Later, I was in a nice apartment 1 block from the train station in downtown Mount Vernon. This would be about 1978, 79. I paid $350 a month. And then I left the area, lived in a few other parts of the country, in Pennsylvania, Northern Virginia, northeastern Ohio, where I bought my first home. And again, the price structure as the years went by started to become more expensive. At one point, I paid $550 a month in the mid-1980s for a townhouse in Northern Virginia. Now those townhouses are much more expensive than that, and I don't think there's anything that you're going to find in the range that I paid in those days. My salary was commensurate. Moving to Westchester County today, the cost of housing is tremendous. If you want to buy a private home in Westchester County, even the most modest home in a decent suburban community could cost you easily $1 million. Now, when I was young, $1 million to me represented a mansion. You know, if I think back on popular television in the 1960s, before many of your times, there was a sitcom called The Beverly Hillbillies. And these folks from rural Arkansas hit oil, and they became millionaires, and they bought a tremendous mansion in Beverly Hills, and that was $1 million house. Now $1 million house could be a 50 by 100 piece of land in one of the upscale communities of Westchester County. So things have changed, and they've changed in a way that for people of average means, people who have jobs that are not on Wall Street, they're not getting large bonuses, or they're not compensated as senior legal minds would be compensated, as people who run major businesses or run major departments of major businesses, medical professionals, and so forth. If without that type of compensation, it's very, very difficult to afford to live in Westchester County. We recognize that as we start the discussion of housing, because it does come down to availability and affordability. Part of the availability issue is that we are densely developed in parts of Westchester County. In the lower part of Westchester County, below 287, you do have some communities with a very suburban style of zoning and appeal. The Scarsdales of the world, Rise, Larchmonts, Ryebrookes, Bronxvilles, a number of them have elite housing on 1 acre or more zoning in certain situations. You have communities that have more middle-class housing, and then you have those for which people who are poor wind up in apartment buildings in tight, congested areas. That's where I started out, in one of those areas in the south side of Mount Vernon. But that's not the only place. Southwest Yonkers, parts of Portchester and New Rochelle have that reality. There are pockets of that kind of housing all across Westchester County, from Sleepy Hollow to Mount Kisco to Peekskill. And so trying to have a coherent housing policy to help people find a place to live becomes a very difficult process. I had one personal experience working on the issue of housing early in my career. The second full-time job that I had when I was the tender ages of 23 and 24 years old, 1977, 1978, was as the housing coordinator in the city of Mount Vernon, and I worked inside the Mount Vernon City Government's planning department. It's the only governmental job I had before I was elected to public office. I've spent most of the rest of my time in the private sector. And during those 2 years, my responsibility was to deal with Section 8 housing program, which was a program created by the federal government in the 1970s under President Jimmy Carter. And the Section 8 program allowed for rental assistance, monies to be paid for families that qualified into units that qualified, and would help people who couldn't otherwise afford market rate housing to afford market rate housing. That program has changed dramatically over the years, and the amount of funding from the federal government has been probably the biggest single reason why it hasn't expanded further. There are many different elements to the program, and that's only one element of housing policy. But remembering those 2 years, at a period of time that dates back over 40 years ago, the problems that were there 40 years ago were there, and they are worse today. So we are trying as best as we can as a county government to deal with something that has been in place for a long time. Again, the availability of housing and the affordability of housing. Before we go to some questions, let me just give you a little rough idea of how our administration has viewed it. First of all, we came out of a situation in the years prior to us taking office where there was a lawsuit that was adjudicated, and Westchester was found lacking in the ability to try to promote affordable housing in all of the communities of Westchester County. The lawsuit was an anti-discrimination lawsuit. It involved 31 communities that, out of the 45 communities of Westchester County, that were asserted that they had not done enough for affordable housing, and that the county needed to take certain steps. Those steps included things like developing 750 units of housing in those 31 communities, trying to encourage, if not impose, model zoning ordinances that allowed for more affordable housing, more multifamily housing, because generally when we talk about affordable housing, we're talking about multi-unit housing. It's not totally that, but to the greater extent, that's what it is. And then also to do a host of different things that would promote and provide public information for those individuals who needed to know more about how to protect their rights in housing, how to protect their rights in foreclosure issues, and so forth. That lawsuit was a major public policy debate that occurred during the years before I became county executive. There was pushback from the county at that time. There was a final settlement, but in the meantime, a lot of difficult words were said, and there were difficult relationships between Westchester County and the federal government, and under those two prior administrations. So we're now into two new administrations, a different federal administration with a different philosophy, and a different county administration with a philosophy. The first and most important thing that we wanted to do was to study exactly what the need was in Westchester County, because everybody's got an anecdote. My mother needs housing, I can't find her a place. I am a an emergency services worker and my salary isn't enough for me to find an apartment or a place to buy. And we know we needed to document it, A, because we had to know just how much housing we needed to try to create in order to satisfy the need, and B, we needed statistical information to go to the state and the federal government to try to get monies to help us do this, because the county cannot do it on its own resources. We put together, this is just a copy of the outline of the cover of the report, but we put together Westchester Housing Needs Assessment, and it took us over a year to have a thorough review of our housing needs. A group called Patterns for Progress did the backup work, and we had great help from our Department of Planning and other elements. We had some outside consultants help us with it. They issued a report late last year, a little later than we are right now, which indicated the need not for 750 units of housing, but well over 10,000 units, and frankly, a potential open-ended need because of the economics of where we are. This is all pre-COVID. This report launched a series of meetings that we had with local government officials, village mayors, town supervisors, other elected officials were included in it, state and county legislators, to discuss what could be done community by community by community. And there are some communities that have embraced the need for developing housing, and there are some communities that have resisted that. And that's based on local realities, local political realities, local land availability realities. We have some communities in Westchester County that have very little developable land. We have some communities that have wide expanses of land, but no infrastructure to support what might be more vigorous housing in those areas. And we face a fundamental problem that's even more important than the questions of whether or not a community is willing to build affordable housing, and that is the market pressure that exists in a county so close to New York City. When you have an open piece of land and it is out on the open market, developers will buy that land and they will develop housing that they believe can be sold at market rate. Market rate is a significant amount of money now. I kind of mentioned in passing that I paid $550 a month when I was in such and such a townhouse in Virginia. You will now find market rate single bedroom apartments in the $3,000 range. That sounds like the amount of money you pay for a mortgage on a house, much less a rental apartment. And of course, the tax laws have changed recently, so the benefits of owning a home isn't quite as robust now as they were previously. But the bottom line is that if there's an open piece of land, in order to provide it and develop it for affordable housing, we have to obtain the land. And when we're competing in a private sector situation, a private developer can come and say, I can put, under zoning laws or with a change in zoning, I can put X number of units on that property and I can charge market rate. How are you going to take the same piece of land and charge less than market rate for affordability? Well, you do it by having subsidies from the state, the federal, and the county governments. You do it by getting the land acquisition costs as low as possible. But if the land is being sold by somebody and they want the maximum profit, they'll sell it to the highest bidder, and the highest bidder knows that they can make profit by having market rate housing. And that is the fundamental reality of Westchester County. Whenever we look at how do we build housing or how do we incent housing that would provide lower costs for people who desperately need it because their income is not robust. We also have the reality, and we don't know what COVID is going to do to change this reality, but we have to acknowledge that because of our proximity to New York City, many people who work in Manhattan and have lived in the city proper, in Manhattan, in some of the neighborhoods of Brooklyn that are reachable by subway into the heart of Manhattan, whether it's Wall Street or Midtown, that the pricing of apartments in Manhattan and parts of Brooklyn and Western Queens, Astoria and so forth, have skyrocketed. And in that skyrocketing of price, it's pushed people out to the suburbs, out to New Jersey, out to Long Island, out to Westchester, across the Hudson into Rockland, up into Fairfield County. Westchester County has the best commute into Manhattan of any of those suburbs. When you're on the other side of the river, it's problematic to cross the river. If you're familiar with the routes, whether you're taking the PATH trains into World Trade Center or you're coming across by car the Lincoln Tunnel, the Holland Tunnel, the George Washington Bridge, very problematic to start out in a suburb on the other side of the river. Fairfield County is a lovely place, but it's that much further away from New York City than the bulk of Westchester County is. And in Long Island, there's a fairly good trip in Suffolk County and parts of Nassau County to go through both of those counties, go through Queens and or Brooklyn, then get into Manhattan. From Westchester County, we have commuter rail spots that are 25, 30 minutes into the city like that. And the closer you are to the city, the more desirable the site is. So therefore, transit-oriented development means more market-rate housing around our train stations. And you've seen that explode in a lot of places. Downtown Yonkers has authorized and have built and in the process of building more units around the Yonkers train station. You've seen that around the Mount Vernon West train station, where we just opened. We were there for the christening of a new building just literally adjacent to, almost attached to, the Mount Vernon West train station. You have that happening in downtown New Rochelle, where there are many projects going up all over New Rochelle to complement things that were done 20 years ago in light of the proximity of the train station. You've had developments in Tarrytown that are extensive developments. You're going to have a development in Sleepy Hollow, all proximate to rail into New York City, and certainly an example of it right here in downtown White Plains with major apartments built along Bank Street, Martine Avenue, easy access to the train. All of that tells you that there is a demand for housing in the private sector that puts pressure on the cost of land acquisition, which makes the possibility of affordable housing that much more difficult. So we have a challenge, and we also have to work through the reality that with COVID now, there is a reduced amount of resources that the county has and that the state has, and the federal government, without, here in a governmental context, we're not going to be political, but I think we all understand there are different philosophies at work under different administrations at different levels of government, and the current realities of Washington, D.C. is that their commitment financially to affordable housing is much more limited than other administrations have been in the past, and therefore we have less ability to tap that money to get us where we need to go. COVID has thrown a monkey wrench in everything. We don't know what our resources will be, and we also know that until the eviction prohibition is lifted, we don't really know what's going to happen out in the marketplace for people that have been unable to pay rent because they've fallen behind multiple months, they've lost their job, and there's a host of different imponderables that are out there. But as we look at the challenge for housing, there are a couple of things I'll mention, and we go to questions. Number one, right now, we're working on in Westchester County, in one way, shape, or form or another, about 1,400 units of affordable housing. In the next few weeks, there'll be a 34-unit senior building opening in Portchester on Regent Street. It's done by Laz Development. Lula Rizza is the developer of that property, and they took a backyard parking lot of what was a restaurant strip mall building, and they've developed 34 units of housing. Over on the site where there used to be homeless housing, right outside the gates of Westchester Community College in the town of Greenburgh, in the Mayfair Norwood neighborhood, there are 75 units of housing that's being built and will open up, I believe, probably by the end of the year. And that was a project we were involved on day one. That project had lay fallow 6, 7 years, maybe 8 years, with no usage of it, and we were able to come in and find a way to jumpstart that and move that forward. We were just at a ribbon cutting up in Peekskill for a project that Bill Bolter has done right in the heart of downtown Peekskill, between the heart of the business district and the area that leads down the slope into where the train station is. 82 units of affordable housing that's developed, and we were in Peekskill a little while before that for a Main Street development that developer Ken Carney had done. There's all different sizes of these projects. We have gone a long way from the public housing projects that were built after World War II. I wasn't born until the 1950s. By then, some of these major apartment complexes have been created. The old traditional housing authority apartments that were done by the federal government here in White Plains and in downtown New Rochelle have been repurposed. The old tall 8, 10-story buildings with a certain set number of apartments have been torn down. They're building lower-rise buildings structured differently, different services inside. And all of this comes at a time where it's more expensive to build housing now than it was at that point. But as we look through where we are, the 1,400 units that we're working on involves a host of different incentives. Some of it is available land, as it was when we opened up Vienna Housing in the city of Rye for 41 units. That was a piece of land that the county owned, 2.1 acres. That was a contribution. In some of these projects where we're going to incent through our industrial development agency, we'll get units out of that. Some of them will be units that are being created because there's legal set-asides that in any new construction 10% or 5% of the units have to be set aside for affordable housing. So there's lots of different ways that we're dealing with it. But the biggest problem we're dealing with is that we're not able to meet the need. the need is far greater than we've been able to deal with. Now, philosophically, some people in government have said, different philosophy, they said, it's not our job to provide housing. That's not our responsibility. That's your responsibility as the individual. We take a different attitude. We believe that the vibrancy of this county requires us to have a diverse population. We need nurses and teachers and policemen and firefighters, as well as Wall Street financiers and top-level legal eagles and top-level medical professionals. We need that diversity. And depending on how much you're compensated will depend on what level of housing you can buy. But there is a need to have housing available. And some of that is a sense of responsibility that we have within a society, but some of it is hard-headed economic development. You can't retain a major corporation here if they want to move, and you can't attract a corporation to come in if you can't provide workforce housing for them. If you can't show them how the bulk of the people that work for them will be able to live in and around the site, the world's most beautiful office complex will still be passed by as they look for a place where they can have housing to go along with the other needs for the corporate entity. So as we try to do that, we hope that will be helpful in the long term. In the short term, we've established a couple of housing programs using COVID money that we hope will help. I'm not going to get into the hard details of this, but we've created programs that involve eviction protection for individuals. We've allocated monies that will benefit money challenged through landlords for those tenants who are good, solid tenants, did not fall into arrears until the COVID crisis happened. And now the landlords can't maintain their properties if they can't get the rent roll from those tenants, and there's one program to do that. We have a different program within our urban county consortium communities. That's 30 communities that have joined forces together. The big communities have their own access to resources. We have a pooled effort amongst 30 communities in which we go after funds from HUD, Housing and Urban Development, and then tenants will apply in those cases, and they'll work through organizations like Westchester Residential Opportunities, Community Housing Innovations, Washingtonville Housing Alliance, Choice of New Rochelle, to help assist those types of individuals. We have also support for those that need 12 months of financial assistance. That is a limited pool of money, and that opens up for people within a certain economic capacity. And then we're also dealing as well with those who face foreclosure. And in those cases, you have home ownership, but you have home ownership that's been compromised by the fact that the individual has lost their job, or if they're a small business person, has lost the viability of the business, and they want to hang on so that that they can weather this through, get back into business, and they can go back and paying the mortgage. And it involves a more complicated level of effort. You have to deal with the banks and the mortgage holding companies, and here you're working with groups like the Bridge Fund, Human Development Services of Westchester County, and some of the aforementioned groups, CHI, WRO. All of these programs are small in scope, and they're targeted pilot programs, see if they work, see if we can find additional funds to run them. Some of that money may come from COVID, some of that money may come from Housing and Urban Development, Community Development Block Grant money. We've tried to put some money aside to be able to do these things. In every one of these things, we're striving to be as innovative as we can and as helpful as we can, because the fundamental role of housing in the society, it's an essential service. You must have a roof over your head, whatever it looks like, and you're not going to be able to educate people, you're not going to be able to have economic development, you're not going to be able to have transportation. All of those things come after you have an individual and a family that have secured housing. And so they have a place to live and they have a place to grow. And if we can figure out in Westchester County how to do that at a better level, then we'll help solidify the future of the county. We will come out of COVID, and when we do, we want to have as strong an economy as possible, and that will include, amongst other things, having a solid base of housing. So it's kind of a long narrative. I'd hope not to open up with a long narrative, but I want to try to explain a little bit of the background, because people will look at the issue just through the lens of what they're experiencing. And if they're having trouble finding an apartment, that's their immediate challenge. How do I find an apartment? How do I get something that I can afford here and now? And you have to see it in the larger context of the market pressures and what kind of assistance is available. But with that, Catherine Chaffee, our Director of Communications, is here. She has gotten some questions in already in anticipation of this, and we'll try to answer them as straightforwardly as we can. And as I said, if we don't get to your question that you've asked, we'll do everything we can to follow up by email and make sure that you get an answer in whatever way is best possible.
Absolutely.
Catherine.
So we've gotten a ton of questions already,
Yep.
and some of them are very specific, but let's start off broadly. First question coming in: where can I get more information about affordable housing units in Westchester County, and how do I apply for them?
Well, we've got here in our executive offices, Blanca Lopez is the person who is our contact in housing. And she sort of oversees the public policy area and how it plays out. Housing issues are dealt with directly by our Department of Planning. Norma Drummond is the commissioner of our Department of Planning, and we have some individuals in that department that are tasked with housing. They are not the housing renters. They're not the people that will say, we will take your application and then we will look for housing for you. But they are the folks that are working on a variety of different projects. I mentioned before the Section 8 program as it exists. We once had a county, Urban County Consortium Section 8 program. We lost that as part of the battle that we had with HUD over the housing needs study. But if you live in a local community that has a Section 8 program, they will have a person very similar to the job that I had all those years ago of Mount Vernon Housing Coordinator. And you would reach out in those communities to the individual that is tasked with running the local Section 8 program and go to them, and there's an application process. Now, there's a long waiting list because there's a lot of need out there. But if you're dealing with your local government and they're in a position to be able to help you, they will also identify what are some of the local projects that are coming online. That is where we can identify for you and say things like, yes, well, the South Regent Street apartments are coming online and there's going to be X number of units in this community. If you're looking for housing units in your home community, then the best place to start is to call your village hall, your town hall, your city hall. If you're willing to relocate elsewhere in the county, then you can reach out to us, and I believe we've got some information that'll be graphics there that you can jot down, and that will give you an idea of how to contact the county. But we have to be candid about this. You know, if the need is 11,000 or more units, right now in terms of availability, we're well below the capacity for that, and it's going to be a long, tough slug to get us to where we need to be. We are working on bringing units online, and the faster we do that, obviously the better off we all will be.
Okay. So the next question comes from Betty. She says, in seeking low-income housing for both my elderly mother when she needed it and couldn't find it, and now my sister who's on Social Security and whose income has dropped to less than $14,000 a year due to the loss of her husband, I find the process of finding housing discouraging. Will Westchester County ever come up with a plan to accommodate people who need housing quickly but don't want to stay in a shelter?
Well, first of all, the challenge for the individual who knows their own individual circumstances does require a level of persistence, and we're not trying to be unmindful of how hard that is to Betty or anybody else. But, we're living in a society where housing is not seen as an automatic right. You're not looking at the way you look at education, where if you have a child who's eligible to start kindergarten, you go to the local school district, they're required to take you in, and education is required to be provided. Housing is not seen as that, and the individual still has to take the effort and the energy to track down the different sources. There are organizations out there that provide everything I've just said in the not-for-profit world. Some of those organizations I've just mentioned, and there are others. There are some organizations that are helpful within ethnic communities. Neighbors Link and Community Resource Center in Mamaroneck, Neighbors Link in Mount Kisco. There are others who work with people in a particular Hispanic ethnic community. There are other local offices, the Community Assistance Program, CAP programs and community action programs, I should say, also provide some assistance for that. And the individual has to have drive and determination to be able to figure out how are they going to contact individuals, and it takes oftentimes multiple contacts to do that. And often, if the person is low income, it's obviously much more difficult. It's hard enough to find a place that you like if you have the resources to put the rent money down that you need to do to get into the place. Infinitely more difficult if it's an affordable situation. But what I would suggest to her and anybody else is that you're certainly welcome to reach out through the county to our county planning department. Indicate the difficulty. We'll refer you to an organization that can be directly helpful to you, and then you'll be able to go through that process. If you're on social services, then the DSS offices, of which there are many in Westchester County, help directly in terms of housing assistance for that specific need. But again, you must keep in mind that it still takes the drive and determination of the individual. We have not seen, as we once saw, 1,000 units brought online in one location of affordable housing or public housing at a very low cost. And it takes that kind of drive and determination to get us there.
Okay, the next question comes from Christine. Can you please explain to me why, with the housing issues in Westchester County, most of the new construction that I see is geared towards wealthy people?
Well, I think I've sort of answered that, Christine, because of the market situation. I'll just summarize it again quickly. The demand for market rate housing is very high. So if you are in a demand for low rated housing, low priced housing, you're in competition with other people who have resources. And so the developer of housing, when they look to build housing, they look and they say, we have a strong market for market rate housing. Why? For the reasons I mentioned before. People who live in the city can't handle Manhattan prices. They come out to Westchester. As expensive as market rate housing in Westchester is, it's less expensive than it is in Manhattan. So all of a sudden you have somebody who says, I can commute to the city. I live near a train station. It's like living near a subway stop in an outer borough. I can be in Manhattan with a snap of the fingers. That's why market rate housing happens more frequently. Again, government, national government, has not determined that housing everybody is a priority from a government standpoint. People have the public policy debate. How much do I spend my taxes on things that benefit you? That's a debate that's going on in the society right at this moment in terms of the presidency, and will go on, for years to come. But the demand for housing in the market is such in Westchester County that a developer can look at a piece of land, develop it, charge market rate prices, and get the volume that they need to make a go of it, which puts the person who can't afford market rate housing at a distinct disadvantage. We try to leaven that out by developing affordable housing, which if it's got enough subsidy on it, someone can come in and then be able to afford it. But it's difficult to do in that kind of a market where every piece of available land is very competitive in terms of who buys it and what they develop.
Okay. The next question comes from Lewis. Recently, Mayor de Blasio was shown making a request to his base to help him put affordable housing in white suburbs. If Biden wins this upcoming presidential election and reactivates AFFH, what are your thoughts surrounding that? What concerns do you have?
Well, the first thing is that if you look at Westchester County, the picture of Westchester County based on 1950 America would say, well, it's a white suburb for rich people that rings a city of urban need and poverty and people of color. But Westchester County is plenty diverse in and of itself. We have upwards of 40% of our people that live in urban centers in Westchester County. Now, Mount Vernon, Yonkers, New Rochelle, White Plains, Peekskill, 5 of the 6 cities, don't compare to the Bronx in terms of size and volume, but they are urban centers like anyone else. So the idea that there are suburbs outside the city and they're, Ward and June Cleaver, cul-de-sac environments, things that you might have seen on television 60 or more years ago, Westchester is very diverse. So it's not about, I think the old days of let's bring people in from there and bring them into here. People are here already and they have a diverse background. The need for fair and affordable housing requires us in government to develop plans to address those issues. And the plans are not the kind of fright night that people want to say, and I understand the questioner raises, the potential of a future President Biden and what he would do. I think President Biden, if he becomes president, will work with local governments and help us meet the needs that we have with affordable resources, which we desperately need to do this. But this isn't, sort of the dark picture that I've heard people argue, which is we're going to go into a neighborhood of single-family homes and we're going to put a 500-unit building in there. That's scare tactics. And that's scare tactics that comes out of an ideology where somebody says, I don't want those people here, so let me make you be afraid of that possibility, and therefore you'll vote for the candidate of my choice. I think the way we've gone about doing affordable housing is the right strategy. We just haven't done enough of it. But you see us do projects where there are 10 townhouse units on old Route 22 in Armonk, affordable units that can be bought. You have a similar situation on the Portchester Rye border on Cottage Street. That's not, oh, we're going to come out to the suburbs and we're going to change things and make people afraid. But we are going to address a legitimate need. And I think it can be done intelligently and it can be done fairly. And when I talk with a number of municipal officials in a number of communities, they're willing to embrace that. Now, there are some communities where that isn't the case. Some of it is the demographic makeup of the community. Some of it is the land use. You talk to people in places like Larchmont Village where they're pretty well built to the gills. There just isn't open space in those square miles of Larchmont. They still found a place to put 45-unit building in a couple of years ago, which is really to their credit. But in general terms, without the available land, it's harder for them to develop that. So they try to look for other alternative ways of dealing with it.
Okay. The next question comes from Tina in Peekskill. She asks, what is the 5 to 10 year vision and role of the county government to aid in the improvement and optimization of shelter services at the Jan Shelter in Peekskill and lifting up Westchester and White Plains?
Well, I think we have to look broadly, not just Tina in Peekskill alone. It's the homeless situation in all of our different locations. We have to make sure that the sites that we have are properly maintained, that the buildings are in proper condition. In some cases, I think that may be the story of Peekskill, there's been pressure to move out of that facility and find an alternative facility. If that happens, we have to find an alternative facility. We have to find one that can accommodate the demand that exists. When we're dealing with homeless housing, we're dealing at a different level of the economic level. When we talk about affordable housing, we're talking about people who are working, but whose income represents 80% of the average median income, or 50% or 30%. When we deal with people that are homeless, we're dealing with people that have no discernible income. They may not be, or they might be in social service settings, and they may have other issues that deal with mental health issues particularly. And not only do they need a housing unit, but they need services wrapped around the housing so that they can function and be good neighbors within that context. So I think in each of the communities, in Peekskill, in Yonkers, in New Rochelle, and any of the urban centers where we have a concentration of homeless people, community by community, we have to look at, is the location that we have now adequate? We made the determination in Yonkers that it wasn't. We looked and searched for different alternatives. We found an alternative. It was very hard to do. And we negotiated out with the local city government and negotiated out with certain zoning, and now we're moving for a different location than the one we've had there traditionally. In Peekskill, as Tina well knows, it has been a very volatile issue. There was a site that was identified on Washington Avenue, I think it was, and it became a big political row. And we understand the threat that people feel when they hear about homeless housing. But we don't have the option here. We can't just say, well, homeless people are this, that, the other thing, and we can't house them. We're tasked by the state to make sure that there's housing alternatives for them. The shelter system is, not the way to handle it in the long term. That's really there for people on a cold night to come and spend a night or two, but there's no other option of housing, so we have to try to develop that. And then we also have to understand that whatever a person thinks of this, the way our Constitution is structured, people have free will. Unless the night is below a certain temperature, we can't just grab somebody off of a street corner and say, you will go into this place. We have to have an emergent life or death situation in order to do that. Absent that, warm summer night, you see people who are homeless, living wherever they can live. And there is homeless resident, not just in the urban centers where you see it, but in many of the rural parts of our county. They're out in the woods. They're in places that are not seen when you drive by, but they're there. Some of that, as I said, are people that have medical issues, health issues, mental health issues that have to be addressed, and some of them are people that just can't find an alternative because they are that low on the economic situation. We go community by community. We look at site by site, and we try to figure out, what is the best site. If the site we're in is the right site, if it isn't, we have to look forward down the line when 2 or 3 years later that site isn't available and there has to be another one. Because we have to provide that services. We're mandated by state law to do that.
The next question comes from Peter, and he has a question about model ordinances. I think first you should explain what a model ordinance is, and then his question specifically is, how effective do you think recommended model ordinances have been in stimulating cooperation between municipalities and the county and the creation of more residential affordability?
Well, it's an outgrowth of the lawsuit that was settled that involved the discrimination charges against the 31 communities in Westchester County for not being involved in trying to mitigate the concerns of discrimination, we were required to promote a model ordinance that, if adopted by a local government, and it has to be voluntarily adopted, it cannot be imposed by the county government, that would then break down some of the barriers for zoning, that will allow for more multi-use structures, and will also allow for individuals when they compete for whatever it is for those different units, that they're not frozen out because the zoning laws make it difficult for them to do that. My general sense is that you're dealing right now with different communities of different size and scope. The model ordinances have been adopted by roughly 20 some odd communities. There's still another 10 communities that have not yet done that. I've sent out letters to most of those communities to send them a model ordinance and to take a look at it. Now, where a community adopts a model ordinance, or they modify it for their behavior, but it winds up being fundamentally accomplishing the same thing. What you're doing is you're breaking down some barriers for which would make it impossible for you to build a particular type of project because the local zoning laws don't allow it. You need a variance, and the variance may not come to the Zoning Board of Appeals. But now the model ordinances creates a certain flexibility that can then allow for certain kind of development to happen. I think in those communities where they've adopted the model ordinance, generally the great benefit in terms of affordability is the set-aside affordability, because most model ordinances include some kind of incentivization for providing X number of units of affordable housing. And I think that's where you've seen, even in a community where they're doing something big, downtown Harrison has got a project on MTA land, there are set-aside units in that. If those model ordinances didn't exist, and some of those set-aside provisions didn't exist, you might have no units in a building like that. But the bottom line is, the MTA is a governmental entity, and they transfer the land so the development could happen, and then you have in it provisions that allow for percentages of affordability that would be helpful. The folks who develop the properties would probably like no affordability because they can get the maximum rent roll. And if you have 100 units and you set aside 5 for affordability, that's not a lot of units. But from you, the developer, you're leaving on the table 5 times whatever the discount is that is created for affordability purposes. So I think they're helpful. I don't think they're the final answer. I think they come in contact with other things. And I'll tell you what I think is important. I mean, if you do the model ordinance, that's fine. It's a matter of political will. You can understand that a question on housing can be very volatile. A person who lives in a certain location, if they see any development of any sort around them that they think affects the value of their house, whether it does or doesn't, as long as they think it affects the value of their house, they oppose it. What's the most common public hearing in a local community? It's when neighbors come out to oppose something being built in the neighborhood. And it's not just housing. It's a commercial facility. It's a school. It's a group home. It's anything that a person thinks will affect their safety or the value of their house. And that's a very subjective situation. And even with model ordinances, you're going to deal with that on an ongoing basis. And that's not limited to the suburbs. We saw proposals in the North Bronx bordering Yonkers for a homeless shelter. And I went to one of the public sessions that was held, and the room was packed in the Bronx with people who lived in the Bronx, diverse group of people in the room, fighting the homeless shelter because they didn't want the homeless population in and around them. And that's a legitimate question. But here's the question. If you worry only about your house and your neighborhood, you don't have to answer this question. Where do we go? Where do we house people who are hard to house? What do we say for people who do have mental illness? What do we say for people who are homeless? Do we say what Scrooge said in the beginning of A Christmas Carol when he said, "Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses?" Is that how we as a society see people like that? Do we see them as disposable people? Or more often than not, just get them out of here. I don't care where they are. Just don't put them near me. Well, somebody's near somebody, no matter where you put them. And I think the smarter answer yes, is to look to site locations that have the most amount of, or the least amount of impact on the area around them, but also to put services that are necessary for people to be able to function, so that you have childcare services, you have access to the medical medicines that are needed for a person in order to control issues that they may have, and you need to put all those services together. Clearly, when you warehouse people and you don't have those services available, you run the risk of the worst possible outcome happening, and we want to try to mitigate the best possible outcome. But I used a comment from Scrooge, since I'm a big Beatles fan. My age category, we fall into patterns. There's a great song that the Beatles wrote, and it isn't built around this, but I think the refrain line matters. The song Eleanor Rigby. It's a deep song for a group of 28-year-old guys to write, and they say, "All the lonely people, where do they all come from? All the lonely people, where do they all belong?" It may be that you as an individual don't need to worry about that. It's not your problem. It's my problem. I'm the county executive for the county. I can't just wave that away. I just can't say, hey, of the 1 million people in Westchester County, 990,260 are good. And there's a remaining group of people, and they number 10,000 or 4,000 or 600 or whatever they are, and they have difficulties. But you know what? Wave them away. You can't do that. You've got to figure out, and you do this not ideologically, but you do this pragmatically, rationally. And can you get the resources to help deal with these people and these issues? It's not easy to do. I don't doubt that however long I'm in this job, on the last day that I'm in this job, I will look at this as probably an unmet need, because the need is open-ended. I talked about having a job in Mount Vernon over 43 years ago, and the problems there then are not resolved in the society today. That's over 40 years. So, but we have to try. We have to make an effort, and I think that's what we're trying to do with the way we're approaching it.
All right, the next question comes from Kathleen. She says, where's the housing for college graduates that clearly can't afford high-end housing due to their college loans? We're losing a generation of good folks. What is the county doing to try to keep them here?
Well, look, I think the college student, the grad student who completes their education, I was one of those once who got, an apartment in a different economic era and in a specific part of the county. They are fundamentally facing the same problem that other categories of people. So I don't think there's a difference between the college student coming out of college with a loan and a nurse who has 2 children, or a school teacher that is now teaching but has college loans because they went on to get a master's degree. All of these people are in the same boat. And the boat is the work that you do starting out in your career does not compensate you sufficiently to buy market rate housing. So it's not as if, hey, you know what, we're working on 500 units just for college grads, and then by the way, over here there's another 300 units for teachers, and then here's 1,500 units for whatever, nurses or firefighters. They fall into a category of need that are eligible for whatever kind of affordable housing we can work on. We have to do more units in absolute numbers. That's where you'll find the answer to your question. How quickly we can take 1,400 units and put them online and make them 3,000 units and put them online is the answer to your question. Now, the college student that comes out with the college loans piece of that equation is something that the federal government has to look at, and they have to determine where we're heading as a society when students come out of college with an enormous financial burden on their shoulders, which they can't handle, but they have to handle, otherwise they'll default. And I think that's the immediate economic circumstances. So you get that first job, you get that entry-level position, you afford as good an apartment as your resources afford. I can tell you, I had at one point in my life for 2 years lived in basically a studio apartment, couple $100, an urban area outside of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania. It was not a lovely place to live. It's what I could afford, and I found it, and I stayed there until I could move to a better place. And unfortunately, that's not the answer somebody wants to hear. They want to hear, well, we're working on a project of 200 units targeted for these kind of people. And right now, the units that we're working on can accommodate just a fraction of the need, but it will accommodate some of the fraction of the people we're talking about, those that that will come in that situation.
The next question comes from Janine. You've touched on this a bit already, but she's asking it, and we'll repeat it again. So she asks, why are there so few options for senior and low-income housing, and why do the existing options have long waiting lists? I may need to move this spring, yet I was told that I should have put my name on the list years ago. How is a senior, I'll be 63 in 2 weeks, supposed to know far ahead of what type of living situation they will need?
Well, I'm a couple of years older than Jean, and I can understand, the problem when you start to project ahead economically. How am I going to handle myself, in the years to come? The first reality you have to appreciate is, as I'm sure everybody knows, is demographic. The senior citizenhood officially starts at 65. There's certain things you can do at 62 with Social Security and so forth earlier in your life, but seniors are living much longer now than ever before. When you build 100 units of senior housing and you occupy 100 individuals, you may have a couple couples in there, but by and large it's 100 individuals in 100 units. You're watching people get into that apartment at age 70 and live, 15 years, 20 years. And they occupy that apartment until they die. And when they do become deceased, they go whoever's next on the waiting list that comes in. But those circumstances, those 236 projects, places like Halsted Manor and Mamaroneck and Maple Avenue, Maple Terrace, and in New Rochelle on Maple Avenue, those kinds of buildings have long-term residencies because people get in there in what I guess I would call young senior citizen years, and they live an extended life, and that's good. We want people to live as long as they can. But what that tells you is the demographics that have changed means that we need more units available, and that's the Vienna project that I alluded to, the South Regent Street project I alluded to, the Greenberg project in Mayfair Norwood that I alluded to, that we have to build not only housing for families, but housing for seniors. Now, when you build housing for seniors, you have certain advantages. Number one, you generally don't need as large an apartment structure. A one-bedroom apartment satisfies for a senior in a way that a family may need 2 and or 3 bedrooms as they have children. The second thing is you get less opposition to senior housing because they don't bring children into the school district. And there's always a school district concern that if you open up the door to lots of new families coming in, you're going to have a lot more kids applying to go to local elementary school where they may not have enough seats and so forth. And then there's the general sense that seniors, when you reach a certain age, you're less intrusive in the neighborhood that you live in. You don't have late night parties. You're not, coming and going at different hours. And so somehow seniors are better type tenants to have. They're more reliable, less of a concern. So senior housing development exists on a faster track, quite frankly, than family housing. But again, what Jean is reacting to is I assume she does. She lives in a community, and there's 1 or 2 facilities in the community. I'll use Rise City as an example where I live. We have the Osborne, which is a beautiful facility. Many seniors live there, but you have to have assets at a very significant level to be able to go to the Osborne. They're building now assisted living facility right around the corner called St. Regis, very upscale, beautiful environment. That'll open up another 100 some odd units. Again, you need to have resources. Those are people who are in advanced ages, but they're wealthy enough. They're selling a house. They're making an infusion of money from that sale, and they can afford to move into those kinds of settings. We have a 100-unit senior housing project that was built in the 1980s, and it's a long waiting list. There's movement, but it's very slow movement. And then now recently we added 41 units of affordable senior housing that just opened a year and a half, not quite 2 years ago. The demand in the city of Rye, and Rye is a relatively wealthy community, the demand for affordable housing in Rye is significant. And the 141 units in those 2 buildings, plus the upscale senior housing, doesn't satisfy just what's in Rye. Now, you go to a community that's got a larger population and less units, that's the problem that Jean is pointing out. And it's the same answer that I gave with the college student, the same answer if a nurse calls up, the same answer if a person approaches us, whatever their background or place is. It is a question of finding the resources to put more units available, more senior units available, more family units available, so that Jean and people like her will have more options. And most of the time, they'll have a lottery system by which they pick people, which seems, difficult to accept the fact that the need is universal. But you open up 35 units, you routinely get 350 people apply, 10-to-1 ratio. And we could build unit after unit of senior housing alone, and, but in order to provide affordable housing, we have to figure out how to build those senior units at a less expensive price. And the single biggest way we afford that is by having land. We have land that the county owns or some other entity owns, and it can be done at an inexpensive price. And that is the nub of what makes affordability the problem. We have to get the land at an affordable price, and therefore we can build units that would be affordable going forward.
Okay. The next question. I am behind in my mortgage payments due to COVID-19, and I'm afraid I'm going to lose my home. Where can I go to get assistance?
Well, I'm going to direct them, because of our new foreclosure program, to one of those organizations that specializes in helping people with foreclosure situations. There are 4 that we're working with the program that we've created: the Bridge Fund, Community Housing Innovations, Human Development Services of Westchester, and Westchester Residential Opportunities, WRO. We go by acronyms all the time. You will find the names of these groups online. You can go in, and if you have, I assume if you're communicating now by Facebook, you have the capacity to search on the internet. Go in and look at the Bridge Fund, or Human Development Services of Westchester, or Westchester Residential Opportunities, or Community Housing Innovation. And they aren't the only 4. There's many others. Washingtonville Housing Alliance. There's some of the other ones that we're working with that I mentioned before that represent Choice of New Rochelle, and there's a host of others. There are aging in place groups in each community that will serve as a resource. But if you're having a problem with foreclosure, you must act quickly, because you're going to need the professional assistance of a lawyer, a counselor, and a lawyer who knows how to negotiate with a bank or with a mortgage company. And there are certain protections that you have, but you can't get them as an individual. You're not able to just walk in the door and in what will ultimately be a court action to foreclose on your house and require a quick transfer. Those things will have to happen, and you'll have to be represented by counsel and by somebody that can help you. We suggest you do that. Generally speaking, if you own a home but you're on social services, then you need to communicate with the social services office immediately. Do not take that letter, and it's a frightful letter to get, and fold it up and keep it in the envelope until it implodes on you. Act right away. There are organizations, and if you're not sure of the organizations, give us a call, 995-2900. Ask to speak to Blanca Lopez. She is a guru at this, and you say, I'm in Ossining. Who would you suggest I call? I live in Pelham. Who do you think I should call? She'll give you the name of somebody. She'll give you contact name, somebody from the organization. You call them. Make sure you get to sit down with one of the case people so you can explain the background of it. Foreclosures usually have a long story behind it. There's always some narrative, and you need to know what the narrative is. Right now, there are some prohibitions because of COVID, but they will lift at some point in time, and you can't assume that everybody's going to give you the break. And by the way, if you own property in Westchester County, the mortgage companies understand how valuable it is. So if they can foreclose on you and then remarket that property at market rate, even a modest house that's in some degree of disrepair will fetch a fair amount of money on the marketplace. So these companies are anxious to foreclose. You can't give them that opportunity. You've got to be able to get representation and help.
Okay. All right, we're just at about an hour, but I think we have time for one more question. Okay. The 2019 Housing Needs Assessment highlighted opportunities for municipalities to preserve and renovate existing affordable housing available in the private market by revitalizing neighborhoods and using tools such as land trusts and tracking of community housing stock and adaptive reuse. How much progress have municipalities and the county made in advancing this effort?
Very little. Very little, and I try to be candid in these things. I don't want to sugarcoat reality. And there's a very simple word for it, and that's COVID. We had meetings, regional meetings right after the new year, beginning of this year, January, a little bit into February, where we met with combinations of local officials. We went through the housing study, we walked through the basic principles of it, including the issues that the questioner has raised. And we saw in some communities an interest in starting to move forward and trying to identify these situations. When COVID hit full force in March and the economy was shut down, you know the rest of the story. Stores were closed, restaurants were closed. Now, they've opened up in June, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, different things opened up, but most of these entities are suffering some financial stress. And individuals who lost their jobs are suffering financial stress. Small businesses are, and governments are too. Now, the municipal governments did not fare as badly as the county did, and the county is not faring as badly as the state does. And that's because of the nature of our revenue streams. It's a conversation that really doesn't involve housing, but the property tax warrants for property taxes are a relatively stable revenue stream. Sales tax is not. When you shut the society down and people stop buying things, your sales tax drops through the floor. That's an important revenue for municipalities, and they now don't have the money to start to do the creative things and the hard work over and above providing basic services. So the local governments say, listen, I'm responsible for police, fire, snow removal, sanitation up to a certain level. There's a certain baseline of recreation that we provide, a certain baseline of senior programs and some other services, zoning and planning and so forth. An initiative along the lines that we've described as being necessary, we have to put it on hold. And in so many ways, so many of our initiatives, we're talking housing tonight, we talked about economic development 2 weeks ago. In so many of these situations, we've had to put plans that we had that we thought were well thought through on hold. Creating a new master plan at Westchester County Airport. It's on hold to start the process until we know we can have a public hearing with people in a room because people want to express their opinion. Right now, there's no traffic at the county airport, so we're in sort of limbo until we can see something change and we can begin that process. So the same is true of these housing initiatives. All I can tell you is that we think those are important initiatives. We think there's interest in the municipal governments to work with them on this, but we need a different economic climate in order for us to make progress on this. And again, I would love to tell you we're working on it, it's going to happen, we're moving forward, but the truth of the matter is, as we have, we've had to strip down our workforce. We lost 5% of our workforce through voluntary separation. Our ability to respond to these things are going to have to wait until we get through the COVID situation.
Okay, that was our last question.
Very good. Well, I would have loved to answer some of these questions in a more direct way by saying, here's the answer to your question. We're building 100 units of housing just for college students, or we're building 150 units for this particular need. For the people who've asked about senior housing, there are senior housing projects that are under development now in different places. I've mentioned two. There's a number more. But the biggest issue that we face is that the need is so great, and we need to just make progress. And we can't get sidetracked as we did with a lawsuit with the federal government. That we have to try to stay on the path, and the path is to build as many possible affordable units as we can, working with developers who know how to do the construction and know how to do the planning, with municipal governments that are cooperative, and we have to encourage every municipal government to be cooperative. And if a community is recalcitrant, incentivize them, try to do what it is to get them online, but to use your discretionary time to build as many units as possible. If we can do that, then we have the greatest possibility of making progress, and we hope to make progress. So, anyway, thank you to Catherine Chaffee, our Director of Communications, who was with me here, feeding some of the questions. If your question wasn't answered, or if you have additional questions, we're going to direct you to the same email address, communications@westchestergov.com. Address your questions or comments to that location. If your communication involves needing a response, we'll make sure that you get a proper response from myself or someone on the team, and we're happy to try to help give you the information that you feel you need. As we go through the various housing projects we're working on, we will use the opportunity to communicate to the public when we have announcements to make that are significant, and we know that people are worrying about a lot of different things right now. They're not necessarily focusing on county government as we approach a presidential election. But we're going to try to do the best we can. We'll communicate with you. We're going to be back here 2 weeks from tonight. I'm not sure if I know what the topic is that we're going to deal. Youth, young, okay. The issues of young people. It's been a while since I was young, so let's see if we can have an interesting dialogue on that point. But thank you for watching. I'm George Latimer, Westchester County Executive. Tomorrow, I will get a flu shot. I will try not to weasel out of it because I think everybody should get a flu shot. We start the month of October tomorrow, and as we head into flu season, we want to protect ourselves from flu, and we also want to make sure we eliminate flu as a possible assessment of a person's health in this age of COVID. Flu shot does not stop you from getting COVID, but it reduces the options of why you're sick. And if you know it's flu and it's not flu, then you know how to handle that. So tomorrow, flu shot, and I'll give the COVID update tomorrow. We'll give statistics about the uptick that we're starting to see, and we'll shoot straight. I'm George Latimer again. Thank you for watching. Have a safe night.